some of the youth's reactions. So, in terms of how easy it was to administer this, the instructions were very detailed and straightforward in the leader's manual. So that was one really helpful thing. That it just kind of has it outlined for you. You don't really have much reason to deviate from that. So that's helpful in terms of the structure. The duration was a little longer than 1 hour, and I think that can just be my lack of familiarity with it. And also had to do some issue with group dynamics in the sense that the manual recommends that there are two facilitators in this group, and I facilitated on my own. So that could be part of the reason why it took a little longer than an hour. And then similar to like with other group-based interventions like ACT and ADAPT, I know having mock sessions before you go in and do the actual session can be helpful in being more efficient in the delivery of the protocol. The group size was 5, so it was a ratio of 1 to 5, which can be a lot when you're trying to cover this much material. And I also incorporated just snacks, because that's something that was helpful and can be helpful when you're dealing with a group-based intervention this way. Another thing I noticed that there were multiple activities per session. There were 4 activities, which is not that much, but there were multiple components per activity, and that really extended the amount of time and involvement that it took and participation that it took to accomplish these activities. I guess in regards to accessing the materials, this is something prior to administering this protocol in the session. It was fairly easy to request it. I requested it through the library, the DePaul library, and I was able to get the materials. But I was able to get the manual and then a workbook. It's recommended that each youth have their own workbook. I only had one and made copies of the worksheets, which is fine for administering on a one-session basis, but I imagine if this were to be something that you'd administer over a period of time and over a few sessions, you would want the youth to then have their own workbook so that they can refer back to it and they can carry it with them or leave it in session for the next week, as opposed to just having a bunch of loose handouts. And then the broad age range. The age range that I administered this with was 16 to 18 years old, and they were all male. So it'd be interesting to see, because the manual recommends that this is targeted for ages 13 to 25, so it's a really broad age range, and you consider the varying levels of development there. So it would be interesting to see how this would work with younger crowds, older crowds, and then even just mixed gender. So now we'll get into some of the reactions of the youth who participated. So the effects on the clients from my perspective, obviously, is that I felt they responded relatively well to most of the exercises. I mean, these are adolescent boys, and they seemed mildly indifferent. So it's like I took that as a victory in regards to the fact that they were just, participating and somewhat engaged. There were a few things where negative elements came out, and I guess that's pretty normal, and it's good. So then that way you can use that as just observation and data of some of the challenges the youth may be dealing with. But for example, when identifying strengths and when they were developing their personal web page, they were asked to list not only their full name but also nicknames, and that was an opportunity where the youth then used their gang nicknames, and some of their gang affiliations and ties came out where they were prominently displaying their gang nicknames. So that's just one of those things that can be used for future sessions, perhaps, when they start focusing on how to identify a pro-social peer network. The future focus was also another interesting thing that I noticed and something to consider, because you may have a varying degree of youth who some have a more detailed and better sense of what some of their future goals and dreams are, and others not so much. So on one of the activities, when they were asking where they see themselves in 5 years, some kids had a better understanding or easier time getting that accomplished, while one youth in particular didn't know how to fill that out and didn't quite have a great idea of what some of his goals and dreams were. So one of his quotes ended up being, "My dream is to have a dream. and that just came off of the fact that he was stumped and didn't have something clear, so he just left it open, which is still, pretty optimistic in the sense that you can build off of that. And this first session does place an emphasis on having strengths or building on strengths. So this is another area where he can build on for this particular youth, narrowing or being more specific about that dream and his goals. Another thing that came up is that the workbook may be too wordy. Another comment I heard from the youth was that we don't want to do homework. There's a lot of text on the worksheets and the workbook that I handed out, and there's also writing involved. That might be a contextual thing. The fact that this was done in a community-based agency and not within the school context makes it that it may be less likely that the students would want to do something like that on an afternoon after a school night, as opposed to if this were in the context of school, perhaps the students would feel be more primed to do a more reading and writing exercise in the school context, as opposed to in a community-based agency where the primary mode of communication was verbal as opposed to written and reading and writing. So those are kind of the general reactions from them, but overall fairly positive. It was, I wondered how it would be to administer something like this over the course of a 10 or 20 week sessions, but for the most part it was a relative success. I was just gauging on their reactions and I guess the moderate ease of implementing this. And then lastly, I'll conclude with just, I guess, a way I would present this to parents or clients, in the sense where I would talk about how this protocol that we would be using with the client or the parent's child would be that it places a focus on trying to have the youth identify what some of their strengths are, and then identifying some of those challenges, and then using some of those strengths to help them deal with whatever challenges that they may be facing. Focusing on certain things instead of saying like impulse control and some of that proactive or reactive control. Just use some more layman's terms talking about like how this can help them develop a better sense of willpower and anger management, as well as instead of talking more in depth about mindfulness,